Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I am Melanie Crater, Museum Director and Curator of Visual Arts. We are pleased to Thank you. Thank you. We are pleased to co-present tonight's program with the WATERMILL Center. Chairs, a conversation with Robert Wilson and Adrian Madlener, is in conjunction with our exhibition, Functional Relationships, Artist-Made Furniture, which features 5 of Bob Wilson's works and 2 from his collection by Donald Judd. I would like to thank the lead funders of the exhibition, Jill and Darius Bickoff, Caroline and Robert Taubman, as well as our Friends of the Museum supporters. Robert Wilson is one of the world's foremost theater and visual artists. Wilson has received global acclaim for his visually arresting stage productions and his unconventional integration of dance, movement, light, music, and text. In 1976, with Philip Glass, he wrote the seminal opera, Einstein on the Beach, a landmark of avant-garde performance. His artistic collaborators include Tom Waits, Laurie Anderson, Susan Sontag, and Lou Reed, just to name a few. His drawings, paintings, and sculptures have been presented internationally in hundreds of solo and group exhibitions, and his works are held in private collections and museums throughout the world. Wilson has received numerous awards for excellence, including a Pulitzer Prize nomination, the Golden Lion of the Venice Biennale, and he holds 8 honorary doctorates. He is the founder and artistic director of the WATERMILL Center. Adrian Madlener is a New York-based journalist, author, curator, and consultant, specializing in collectible and sustainable design. Known for his focus on craft-led experimentation, he contributes regularly to leading publications, including Cultured, Dwell, Hypebeast, Frame, and Wallpaper. He has authored monographs and curated exhibitions on American design history, contemporary glass, counterfeit culture, and tool theory. As a consultant, he advises architecture firms, design brands, and cultural institutions. Bob and Adrian have known each other for many years, so I believe this conversation will be insightful and delightful, so please welcome Bob and Adrian to the stage.
Welcome, everybody. So I'd like to begin on a quick personal note. So not only have I performed on this stage as a kid in the past, I also spent a lot of time immersed in the really dynamic, diverse, creative community that converges on WATERMILL every summer. And for me, that was quite formative. In this fundamental understanding of interdisciplinarity, especially as I've pursued design for the past 17 years. Of course, interdisciplinarity is something that is also very integral to Bob's work. The notion, this Wagnerian concept that opera is the best manifestation of a total work of art, the coherence of a lot of different creative disciplines in equal measure, and of course, design. Of course, this evening we're here to mark the launch of Chairs, Bob's new monograph, which is a really comprehensive overview of the hundreds of chairs that Bob has designed, stools, benches for on and off the stage, and is really well edited by longtime Bob collaborator Owen Laub, fantastically photographed by Martien Mulder. There's great essays by historians Glenn Adamson, Trevor Fairbrother, Marie DeTesta, and Young Now, who also happens to be the publisher of August Editions, which in partnership with New York Gallery Raisonné published the book. So Bob, I'd like to start, the book opens with a fantastic anecdote about your first chair. Would love to hear that story from you.
Well, I was about 13 years old, 12 or 13, and I went to visit at Thanksgiving my uncle who lived in Alamogordo, New Mexico, in the white sand desert. And he had a very simple house that he'd built himself. And it was white adobe and just a few rooms on the ground floor and thick walls. And there was one room where he had a mattress on the floor and a Navajo chieftain blanket covering the bed. There was another room, he had Native American pottery on the floor, and that was all in the room. And there was another room, there was only one chair. And it was a tall, thin wooden chair. And I said to my Uncle Sherrod, I said, Uncle Sherrod, that's a very beautiful chair. And he was someone who didn't speak very much. He was a recluse. And later, a month or so later, I returned home to Waco, Texas. And he sent me the chair as a Christmas present. And so I wanted to live like my Uncle Sherrod. Hi, Kathy. And so I wanted to move all of the furniture out of my room and have a mattress on the floor and have only this chair. And so I did. And so this chair was something very special. And when I was leaving to go away to the University of Texas, my cousin, my Uncle Sherrod's son, wrote me a letter and said, my father gave you that chair, and it's mine. And I want it back. So I sent it back to him, and that was the beginning of my collecting of chairs.
Fantastic. And so, going on from the University of Texas to Pratt, can you talk a little bit about how, studying architecture as a sort of foundation, a discipline that actually is very interdisciplinary, lends itself to a lot of other disciplines, how that was sort of formative in understanding theater, but also the design of chairs?
Well, architecture gave me a frame of mind, a way of thinking, a way of looking at space, a way of constructing space and time. I had, in 22 years of formal education, one great teacher, only one, and it was Sybil Maholy-Nagy, and she taught the history of architecture. And it was a 5-year course, and her lectures were amazing. The room was rather dark, and she was always dressed formally. She stood at a podium, and in back of her there were 3 projection screens. This is the early 60s, and there was rapidly projected images. A Byzantine mosaic, a Renaissance painting, a Frank Lloyd Wright chair, and her lectures had nothing to do with the imagery. And the lights were rather dim in the room, so one couldn't see to take notes. And she would say, in a month you would get a schedule. October 1st will be a lecture on Bauhaus. October 20th will be Bauhaus. October 29th will be Bauhaus lecture. So it's now the 1st of October, her first lecture on the Bauhaus. She walks out, formally dressed, has a black leather handbag, and put it on the floor. And she opened up the bag, and she took out a fish. Yeah, a fish. And it was wrapped in saran wrap, and she unwrapped it, and she put it on the podium. And she talked about Bauhaus architecture, never mentioning the fish. Her lecture had nothing to do with the imagery we were seeing in back of her. And it was curious, over 5 years, this lecture had been structured. Second Bauhaus lecture was in 20th of October, and she put the handbag on the floor, opened it out, and put an orange on the podium. She never explained the orange. Again, it didn't relate to the imagery we were seeing. You know something? I'm still thinking about that fucking fish. I'm still thinking about that orange. But she never gave us answers. But it was curious, after 5 years, you began to become familiar with the Renaissance painting that was being repeated, or the mosaic that was being repeated. And in a very curious way, you began to understand something about what you were experiencing and seeing. But the most important class was in the middle of the third year. And she said, students, get out your papers and a pencil. You have 3 minutes to design a city. Ready, go. Wow. That was the best class I ever had in school. So I, in 3 minutes, took a piece of paper and thank you. I don't know if you can see this, but here I will. I made a drawing of an apple. And inside of the apple, I had a crystal cube. So she asked me afterwards, said, what are you thinking about? I said, our communities, our cities, our towns need something like a crystal cube inside of the apple. Like in a medieval village, the cathedral was the highest point. It was the center of the village. If you were rich or if you were poor, you could walk in the door. It was a place where artists showed work. It was a place where painters showed paintings. It was the center of the village. And what our communities need are centers, like Guildhall or like the WATERMILL Center. But communities need centers. And what most important to me was that I had to think quickly about the whole. And that had a tremendous influence on me and still does. Today, I started a workshop with Mikhail Brezhnikov on a new work I'm doing with him. We have no idea what is going to happen. There are some texts that have been written by Darrell Pickney. But what I did is this. This was in about 2 hours, 3-hour workshop. But the first hour I did this. I said, okay, how long do we think the piece should be? So it could be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours. So we agreed that it would be an hour and a half, about, more or less. So I made a mega structure. Said 1, 2, 3, 3 acts, right? And I don't know if you can see that, but and we would have A, B, C sections. This was this afternoon before coming here. So I know now it's in 3 acts and 3 seams, A, B, and C. So we said, okay, what is 1A? So Daryl said, oh, maybe 4 minutes. He's the author. I said, okay, what is 2A? Well, maybe 8 minutes. What is, until we added up an hour and a half, not knowing anything. So then I need to know the space where I am. And if I know the space where I am I indoors? Is the space dark, or is it space light, or is it outside? If I know the space, it's much easier for me to decide what to do. So this piece is based on Don Quixote, which was one of Misha's famous roles in dancing. And now it's a play, the solo piece for him. So Daryl said, I think it should start in a library. I said, okay. And where do we go from the library? He said, the next scene he thinks maybe the library is going to burn. And we talked through it. Next scene is maybe a landscape. And the next scene is, so I have one ABC. What are the ABC relationships? And I was thinking of the traditional ways that painters measure space. So if I see my hand here, I can consider this a portrait. If I see my hand over here, it's a still life. But if I go across the street, it's a part of a landscape. So those are three traditional ways that painters have measured space: portraits, still lifes, and landscapes. So I, anyway, worked the first hour or so on spaces that were based on those perspectives: portraits, still lifes, landscapes. And starting with the library and the library burning, and then going to a landscape, and a landscape that was different. And I very quickly, within an hour, had made sketches of the visual book. And this is contrary to the way most directors or writers work. I want to know where I'm going. What is the climax? So I talked to Misha, and we're there. Not knowing now the text or the material, I said, okay, what if we have 2C be the climax of the evening? Not knowing anything else. If I know where I'm going in the beginning, it's easier for me to figure out how to get there. And then how do I get out of it? And anyway, I took it from there until before I came here, about finished around 5:30, I had mapped out the whole evening visually. Then I had Daryl read text, and we were beginning to place the text in this mega structure. And then I'll add sound. But that really comes from Sybil. Can I tell you, in less than 3 minutes, what is the whole? I did a 12-hour silent opera in early 70s, Life and Times of Joseph Stalin. It was in 7 acts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1 and 7 related, 2 and 6 related, 3 and 5 related, and the turning point was in the 4th, the center. And we spiraled out, spiraled into the center, and spiraled out. That comes from Sybil. You know, I can tell you in about a minute what was the 12-hour opera, abstractly, structurally. That structure is a classical structure. Most all of my works are classically constructed. What is King Lear? There's a king who divides his kingdom in the beginning. And in the center of Shakespeare's King Lear, the center line, Lear says, "I shall go mad." And then he goes into nature. Parsifal of Wagner. I'm leaving on Sunday to go to Europe. I'm directing Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. Look at Parsifal. Parsifal is the white knight in the beginning, the center bar of music. When Parsifal grabs the lance of Klingsor, he says, "Time becomes space." And there, from the center on, he becomes the Black Knight. So most of my works, like Stalin, no one noticed it, are classical structures. The work I'm best known for is Einstein on the Beach. It's in 4 acts, A and B, 1. Act 2, B and C. Act 3, Act 4, A, B, C together for the first time. People said it was avant-garde. That's not avant-garde. That's theme and variation. It was a classical structure. It didn't tell a narrative, but it was based on theme and variation. All of that, to make this long story short, was a part of my education studying architecture, and will always be indebted to Sybil Moholy-Nagy for her vision, for her unique way of teaching. I started out as a teacher, and I just came from China, where I was working with young actors. In some ways, it's like coming full circle. But the WATERMILL Center, as you said, is we work on many levels, and it's we have an open door policy. And at WATERMILL, in 1967, I decided to start a foundation based on 4 principles. Always look to the past as you go forward. In order to make our community rich, we must look at the global community. And those 4 principles have been the guiding force of the WATERMILL Center since 1967. In 1969, Jerome Robbins was the chairman of the board, and he said, one of the problems we have with the Martha Graham Company, with the Alvin Ailey Company, is they're not legally educational institutions. They're doing great work as educational institutions, but they're not allowed to receive monies as an educational institution in a non-for-profit. And so in 1969, we added 4 principles to our bylaws. That is, we are for scientific, literary, artistic, and educational purposes. And those principles, plus the bylaws from 1967, are the guiding force of the WATERMILL Center.
Bob, coming back to chairs specifically, looking at these, elements that are so integral to your stagings. They're what some people might think of as props, but they're much more than that in your work. And you sort of talk about how these designs, as within the framework of classical structures, are embodiments of, say, Queen Victoria, Pierre Curie, Marina Abramovich. Can you sort of talk about how they are protagonists on the stage as well?
I think chairs for me are not a prop for a stage work, but are an integral part. And Marcel Breuer said, In the detail of this chair that I've designed are all my aesthetics. The same aesthetics that go into designing a building, the same aesthetics that go into designing a city are inherent in the detail of this chair. So chairs often are central in a production. They're carefully crafted. I did 1993 and Madame Butterfly at the Paris Opera, and there have been 14 revivals now. And there was a technician that I worked with. We built a chair for Butterfly. And we spent about 8-9 months building the chair. It was a very complicated chair, very, very simple in form. It has a thin slat back and a thicker box seat, and it's supported by one leg, a bamboo leg. And this technician engineered it. It's black lacquered. And to this day, technicians wear gloves, carry the chair on stage. It's placed in a sack and a box that he built for it to be placed. And the wonderful thing about it is this man, for the opening, brought his family from Bordeaux to see this chair that he had made. And the pride of the technician having built the chair, was something very special. And it's still very special in the production. Oh, that's that Wilson chair. We have to wear gloves to pick it up. But it's one of the sad things that has happened is because of unions. A few years later, I did Frauenschatten at the Paris Opera, and I had 5 different teams of people because of work laws working on the chair. And I said, hey, look at this detail. Well, I didn't do that. The other guy did that, We've lost pride in the craftsmanship. But one thing I've tried to do is, with the furniture, is Breuer said that in the detail of this chair are all my aesthetics. Bellenstein said pretty much the same thing in making a ballet. He was just a craftsman, like making a chair.
So in the forms that you've created, some of them are sort of pushing the conventions of what functionality is. How do the objects interact? How do these chairs interact with the performers, the dancers? How do they sort of determine their movements,
Well, see, in the work I make, which is an epic theater, all elements are equally important. So I can light this bottle of water and turn all the lights off on Adrian and myself in the room, and we see only this bottle of water lit and continue talking. And in a sense, the light and the bottle of the water become an active participant. It's not just a prop. So each element has its own integrity, its own vitality. And then I put together a construction that's layered with all of these different elements. So in directing a play sometimes, or very often, maybe some of you saw the work I did with Isabelle Huppert recently, Mary. So sometimes I turned all the lights off in the room and just listened to Isabelle like a radio drama. And sometimes then I ran the play with no text, just movement. So if I run it as a silent movie, it can stand alone. If I run it as a radio drama, It can stand alone. So in the silent movie, we're free to imagine, what does the person look like? What does the room look like? What is the space? And there's a kind of freedom there. And if we see, if you're watching TV, turn the TV off and suddenly you start seeing this twitching or nervous gesture of the news broadcaster or something that you begin to see more acutely. If you close your eyes, you'll hear better. So my challenge is, can I put something on stage that what I see can help me hear better than when my eyes are closed? Can we give that freedom that you have in a radio drama, the freedom you have in a silent movie? And then when you put them together, they can work independently. But seen together, they, in this dualism, in this parallelism, they can reinforce one another and become stronger by what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. So maybe I'd like just a chair and the play continues. And that way the light and the chair are integral to the whole. I can say, I want to kill you! Or I can say, I want to kill you. Maybe the smile is more terrifying than the shouting. So it's not just any arbitrarily opposite that you put together, but it's how can they reinforce one another without illustrating. So a chair is not just an illustration or a prop to the stage necessarily, but it's integral to the whole. It can be, so people now will look, I mean, in the room next door, you'll see chairs of Bessie Smith. That's an opera made with Allen Ginsberg. No one knows about the opera. I did in Hamburg with Allen. But you can see the chair and look at them on their own independently and the craftsmanship in which they were made. And they can stand alone as sculpture or as an object. But seen in the context play, there's something else. Most people will never ever know the productions from which they come. All of the furniture that we're showing here were in various stage productions. So that
Perhaps
comes to my
just a
background.
last quick question. I mean, it's maybe not a small answer, but looking at WATERMILL as sort of a total work of art as well, can you sort of talk about this idea of art being life and life being art, and how all of the furnishings, your own furnishings, the ones that you've collected, are objects that are lived with. They're not behind a vitrine. They're very much part of this sort of, as you say, a sort of total kind of combined work.
Well, it's not a great collection, but we have works that go back more than 5,000 years ago. I went to an art school, there was no art. If I wanted to see tribal art, I'd have to go to an institution that showed tribal art. If I wanted to see classical art, I'd have to go to the Met or the Frick or somewhere else. If I wanted to see contemporary art, I'd have to go somewhere else. So my idea, can we as a cultural institution live with the knowledge of man and what man has done in the past as we go forward and create new work? So you can pick up a Chinese Neolithic pot is 3,800 before Christ and hold it in your hand. How do you hold a pot that is 5,000 years old? You know, you hold it like you hold a baby's head. So as an educational institution, it's very important that we live with awareness of what man did before us. as we create new work and go forward. And it's very important, especially now with Donald Trump president, that we invite the global community, the world community, that we invite someone from Ghana, as we did last year. A kid had never been to the United States. He came, and Pace Gallery picked him up, and he's selling his paintings for $150,000 to $200,000 and up. This kid coming from Ghana. Yeah, keep that door open.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Bob. I think we have time for a few questions, if there are any in the audience. There should be mics. There's one down here. Yes. Oh, okay.
One of the experiences I have had in my life that corresponds to what you have been talking about.
Let's take the microphone. Thank you.
One
Good
of the
evening.
Hello. One of the experiences that I have had that corresponds to what you have been talking about. I'm sorry, can you hear?
Yeah.
Was a performance by Baryshnikov of a Mark Morris ballet in which he wore Gene Kelly socks and white gloves, and it was reminiscent of so many things simultaneously, including Mickey Mouse and Al Jolson. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever seen the performance?
No, I haven't.
It was a Mark Morris. I saw Mark Morris dance it, but also Baryshnikov.
Right.
And I have been trying to find a recording of it. It's extraordinary, and it is exactly to what you have been describing.
Well, Misha is amazing. I mean, he's really, wow, what a treasure we have in that man. What he did with Cinder in New York. See, he's following the same principles. He's inviting artists from all over the world. And what a range. You know, I mean, being one of the great dancers of our time, there are only 2 or 3, and he's one of them. But he's done contemporary works, even today. I mean, he's working with me. I'm not a dancer, I'm not a, but, and he does everything. Whether it's, I've made 2 productions with him, but his range, his interest, and his generosity in supporting other artists. It was not just for him. I mean, Rudolph was a great dancer. Amazing, you know, one of the great ones of our time. But Rudolph wanted it all, you know, for himself. Misha has been so generous. Do you know the center he has in New York? It's amazing. And he himself, with his monies, with very little money, funds it. But yes, I mean, going from one of the great ballet dancers of our time to, you know, Mickey Mouse is no problem for him.
Is there another question? Oh.
He's not afraid to do the wrong thing.
Should I ask? Hi. Hi there. I have a question about your artist residency program. When you were creating the residency, how did you think about the way that artists living in a space would be interacting with the built environment, the architecture, and the design that was surrounding them? That's part 1. And how has that evolved as the artists have actually inhabited the space?
Well, when I established the WATERMILL Center, I began to acquire it in '89 and going into 1990. I wanted to move from Manhattan and have a studio with trees and light. And I thought from the beginning, and I did already in the 60s to invite other artists to come to my studio and to work. So all of the rooms at the WATERMILL Center are just rooms. So sometimes it's a room that I arrange, or sometimes a space in which I make drawings or whatever. Or sometimes it's a room where I rehearse a new production, like I'll start tomorrow staging Misha. But next week, there'll be artists that come in, use the same space, and do something else, whether it's sculpture or paintings or whatever. So I don't want to have a school of thinking. I don't want a Robert Wilson school of doing. Look at the Bauhaus. There was a way of thinking. I don't want to have a way of thinking. I want to have diversity in the artists that come. So I just came from China. One of the women that I worked with will now be attending, wants to come to WATERMILL. She's 20 years old or something. Or you have someone from Latin America, from North America, Eskimo, whatever. And then they can do what they want. And I no longer am involved in the selection of the artists coming. I let other people do that because I don't want to have this Robert Wilson way of doing things. There's things I've learned in 50 some odd years of working in the theater that I can pass on, can talk to others about, but they have the freedom of mind to do what they want. And that is our strength. And,
Fantastic. I think we can take one more question. There's one up front.
That was fantastic. Faith Popcorn, hi.
Hi.
That was fantastic. Anyway, I'm curious because you talk a lot about museums in the past and relics and chairs that you made before and everything. How the future is influencing your work.
Well, the future is, people ask me frequently, when I was in China, people say, what do you think about AI? It's one of the first things. Great. It's one of the tools of our time. Use the tools of our time. It's okay for me. Who knows what the future will bring? But let's support it and stay open. It's like fire, right? So with AI, you can say it can harm you, but it can warm you. It depends on how you use it and what you do. But don't be afraid of using the tools of our time, and don't be afraid of the next moment. Trust it. Just listen. Those little nuances of sound will never happen again. Never. So the only thing that's constant is change. As long as you're living, you're breathing, you're moving. As long as you're listening, there's always sound. And one thing that fascinates me about theater is that you become more aware of the movement in stillness. If you're aware of the movement in stillness and you move outwardly, the line continues. There's no stop. When you stop moving outwardly, there's still movement. And if you're listening and you begin to speak, the line will only continue. So even if it's, recently I directed Verdi's Otello. So Verdi starts with a storm, very loud. I showed a 7-minute film in silence before. And the storm, the loudness of Verdi's music was even more powerful because I'd been 7 minutes in silence. So, listening to silence. Yeah. Theater, there are no stops, it's only go. Martha Graham said there's no such thing as no movement. We're always moving. John Cage said there's no such thing as silence. There's always sound.
Fantastic. I think that's a great note to end on. I think we'll move to...
Thank you.
Bob.
Have a good evening.